terms of English deploying factories, but one of the things I learned in the Board of Economic Welfare, because I studied photographs and report after report on the bombings in great industrial manufacturing plants. The walls were an absolute mess, just ruined them, and they tumbled down all over everything. We got them cleaned up, and the machinery is usually really very good shape. Now, the machinery is not so destructible, but what somebody hurt was the building, so they cleaned the rubbish away and moved the machine code to get the distributor some kind of way he can modify, make the thing all right. But if we found that really couldn't be done, they really then had to change the production. The Chrysler Company and all the other automobile companies had a set of scarlet stationery. And we want to see that scarlet stationery. Get out of the scarlet. It's called a change order. A change order, and they ring bells everywhere, and they fire 10,000 people, literally. It is an explosion in the automobile game. A change order. As I say, everything's done on the scarlet stationery, and so everybody just fears this thing. It's one of the things to breed them. They must absolutely fear any change. It must be so thorough before it's done. So, having learned that about that, because in the end they don't want any overtime. You know, overtime costs much too much money. So, it's going to take 3 years to tool up, because you must never have 1 second of overtime. And do nothing really looking out for labor. So when I then began to combine my experience in what I knew about Chrysler and so forth, my own automobile development, and getting into the aircraft plants and so forth and their production needs, I can then tell you a set of events that took place that were very, very important. America then didn't come into the war right away, but by the time they came in, the English and the Germans had been battling for several years, and everything was who has air control, which is the bombing control, because you're going to get back, if you bomb, you can bomb all the production capabilities of the side. So this air supremacy was the very essence. And the English and the Germans fighting each other saw that if you change the design a little bit like this, then you can get a little better. So the experience was lethal, but also taught them how to design. So both in Germany and England, design began to really change in a hurry. And they had to develop really new tools. One of the things that happened with Germany and England both realized that you better deploy your factories. I'm telling you more or less a side thing here, but I'll come back to German and English deploying factories. But one of the things I learned in the Board of Economic Welfare, because I studied photographs and report after report on the bombings in great industrial manufacturing plants. The walls were an absolute mess, just ruined them, and they tumbled down all over everything. We got them cleaned up, and the machinery is usually really very good shape. Now, the machinery is not so destructible, but what somebody hurt was the building, so they cleaned the rubbish away and moved the machinery and put it out in barns, and then they deployed all their operation. So you got the farming family to work at night with the lights all obscured, and they built out in the barn running the punch press. And they had trucks then go around, pick up this and pick up that, and then assembly plants. Well, you could move your assembly plant pretty around. It had an assembly line under any kind of a barn, or some big building. Then you move that around so the enemy really would know where you were, where you're producing it. Deployment by subcontracting became absolutely fundamental in production, particularly that airplane game. Now, but the big thing was the invention by the Germans and the English of tools that you could make quick changes. How they kept inventing ways to change your design rather than producing exactly what it had been. Because I said to you, in the great fundamentals of economics, that steelmaker said, more it rusts, the more I like, we don't change. I'll tell you, in the great corporations of the world, up to the time of World War II, any executive said we'd like to make a change here, we got fired. The only company where you could do it was Henry Ford, and he's the one who made the changes. And he loved it, and somebody really could give him a good idea. He really went after it. But the other companies, no, because you want to make money. You don't want to spend all your money on these changes. So this was anathema in the idea of making money, but essential if you're going to really get somewhere, that there would be change. So the freeze up of the Chrysler Company and all the other companies, that change order being anathema, was typical really of a sort of a death point of service to humanity. Now, so I said it brought about all kinds of changes, the deployment of the manufacturing, and they then began to develop most extraordinary trucks, because you're going to have a section of a wing, and this wing could get so readily hurt. And so then the trucks they would jig shipping. You didn't have to put the beautiful wing piece in a heavy crate. All shipping up this time had been continually, there's a great shipping art. Anybody produced any machinery had to learn how to put it together, and so it's not going to get hurt while it's being shipped. But suddenly then the trucks themselves, this truck did nothing but carry that airplane wing. It was a beautiful jig shipping. Things came in, and took care of the loads at exactly right. As you can tell, the bumpiest road, no put that thing in any jeopardy at all. So jig shipping is called. Now, there are toolings I speak about, and I'm going to get into sort of evolution of things that go on here that are very, very important, which I think you'll find very exciting. The Congress had been persuaded by the same kind of nonsense as that book that I had to write for Chrysler, and they used enormous propaganda. I think they got 125,000 copies distributed right away, and this got then the Congress to make the Air Force give the orders to Detroit. And I said Detroit had gotten then, the Air Force had to get out of this design of the bomber, this kind of a fighter. So they tooled up for it. And the kind of planes then that the United States was making to go to Europe, to go for our armed forces, so with them training our armed forces, so forth, they're going to have to fly these things in Europe. So much of being learned by the Germans and the English, and the evolution of the plane was so very rapid that these planes that are being made in the United States became absolutely obsolete. So they developed in America, Detroit said, we take care of that, and we just have a modification line. So they built a second production line. When the minute that plane was finished, put up the head of the production line, went right down, got all rebuilt again. Then by the time they got to England, they still were out of date. So in England, they set up a new production, the remodification plant again. And then by the time they literally got into the war, when the Americans then came and did their first bombing strikes and so forth, so many planes were lost. It's absolutely lethal to fly the damn things. And so Detroit said, that's all right, we're just going to, we absolutely outproduce those people anyway. So the planes are going to get lost, but we just outproduce them. Well, at this point, American mothers began to get to the American congressmen and said, we can't outproduce the kids. And there was the Congress really then suddenly became really alarmed at the rate of the killings, and if we had really any distance, they're going to be incredible slaughter. So they simply said to the Air Force, well, what should we do? We've been forcing you all the time. So the Air Force said, we found that the contracts had been made, the lawyers, people had worked